Welcome to Super Nutrition Academy's health class with your host and registered holistic nutritionist, Yuri Elkaim. Tune in each week for up-to-date insights on breaking health news and best practices on how to eat for awesome health. It's time to get smarter, healthier, and regain your sanity in a world of information overload. And don't forget to join Yuri at supernutritionacademy.com so you too can master your nutrition and health.
Hey, Yuri Elkaim here, and welcome to episode 2 of the Super Nutrition Academy health class. I'm excited to be back with you to bring you some amazing insights into a very common topic nowadays, which is the flu and different viruses that are going around. Now, before we get into this, I do need to say that as a disclaimer that this information is not a replacement to medical advice that you would get from your doctor. So please be sure to take this information into consideration and obviously discuss this with your doctor. So this is not meant to be medical advice or anything like that. It's just here to inform you and equip you with better tools that you can be a little bit more educated about the stuff that's going on. So this week we're going to be talking about some really interesting stuff that's been happening in the news. And obviously February is the peak of flu season in the Northern Hemisphere, so it's really a fitting time to discuss this. So what we're going to be talking about today are a couple of different things. We'll be talking about the Norovirus. We'll be looking at influenza. We'll also be talking about this huge uproar with something called the coronavirus, which is actually pretty funny. So not funny in the sense that obviously it's just funny in how the media has kind of blown it out of proportion. And that's one of the reasons that I've put together this podcast, to bring some perspective to some of the media nonsense that's out there. So let's get started by talking first of all about first of all, I'm going to give you a personal anecdote about this specifically, because a couple weeks ago I was in Tampa and I was down there with some friends from the health and fitness industry. We were having a great time over a couple days, just kind of celebrating a new year. And we were out for dinner one night, and all of a sudden, it was about 9 o'clock and we were at the restaurant. All of a sudden, I was probably with about 9 people, and I told them, sorry guys, I have to get back to the hotel. I really do not feel well. And it hit me out of the blue. I got back to the hotel, and I don't mean to be graphic here, but I literally blew chunks. I spent from 9 o'clock till about 5:30 in the morning going back from my bed to the toilet, throwing up, diarrhea, the whole bit. It was one of the worst sessions I've ever experienced in my life. And this is worse than when I was like in my early 20s and I had a bad experience in Acapulco as a college student, having had too much to drink. And thankfully, I've learned a lot since then. With Montezuma's Revenge, they have all that stuff in Mexico. This was worse than that. And, we're talking about like a grown man, like crying between, bouts of vomiting. It was really, really bad. So if you or anyone else has experienced this, this is Norovirus, also known as Norwalk virus. And it's debilitating, at least during the time that you have when you're vomiting and so forth. So very common symptoms of the norovirus include obviously vomit, diarrhea, abdominal cramping, just because your body's trying to purge all that out. So it's there's a huge amount of activation of those abdominal muscles. And because you're losing a lot of pretty much everything, I got to the point where I was ejecting bile. It was really just not fun at all. So again, I apologize for the graphic detail, but so the other thing is that it obviously depletes your energy, because if you're ejecting all this stuff out, you're evacuating all this stuff out of your body, you don't really have much left. Hydration is an important issue. So the next day, I was actually in a meeting all day. And all I drank all day pretty much was water, Gatorade. I had a couple crackers and some bananas, that just to kind of rehydrate myself and kind of come back to life, if you will. And even when I got better, I was still out of commission. I was still more tired than normal for probably 4 to 5 days. So this is what you can look forward to with the norovirus. Okay. And this year especially, we've seen a lot more of it. And interestingly enough, it hasn't been... Interestingly, it's ironic that it hasn't been covered as much in the media, at least from what I can tell, compared to the coronavirus. And the coronavirus, we'll talk about in a second, seems to be. It's funny how there's such a discrepancy here. But the norovirus, it's very, very common. It's very, very contagious. Okay, so the reason I contracted it was that a couple nights prior to me getting it, I got it on a Thursday night. I was up with my son Oscar, who at the time was 2, and he started crying in the middle of the night. We went into his room and there was just, vomit all over his bed. So we cleaned everything up, got him out of there, and I decided to spend the night on the couch with him. We covered the couch in towels, and I just said, if he's going to throw up, might as well have him throw up on the towels as opposed to a fresh bed. So we spent the night together, and he was just, again, same thing with him. He's just waking up every 20, 30 minutes, a little throwing up here and there. And just, poor little guy. I mean, it's just so brutal to see him go through that. I really made a conscious effort to obviously be there for him, but at the same time understand that this is very highly contagious, and to kind of keep my distance and really watch things as much as I could. I felt fine for the next 2 days. I was thankful because I was on a plane the next morning, and I didn't want to come down with that on the plane. I was fine for that day, fine the next day, and then it was again that 48 hours afterwards that it just hit me like a ton of bricks. So that's norovirus, and the reason I want to talk about it is that there's a couple things that are really important to understand with virology and communicable diseases. And I think the norovirus is actually really pertinent in helping us kind of demonstrate this, in the fact that, even if you can be as healthy as you want, but sometimes there are just certain things that are out of your control. Okay, I mean, in terms of preventing the flu, preventing the norovirus and other types of viruses, it really comes down to hand washing, but not going crazy with it. And we'll talk about that a little bit more specifically in a bit. Covering your mouth when you cough. This is something we've tried to teach Oscar at a very young age is, if he's coughing or sneezing, to cover his mouth and not to cough on food or in other people's faces. Okay. So again, these germs spread by kind of saliva, airborne contact, but also hand to hand is very, very common. So if you're shaking someone's hand during flu season, the susceptibility of you developing or coming down with something could be greater. So you really want to avoid that kind of stuff. Maybe do a fist pump like Howie Mandel does. But those are some very simple things that you can start to put into play is hand washing. But I do want to mention something about hand washing, okay? Hand washing with soap, not antibacterial nonsense, okay? The part of the problem in our world nowadays is that we have all these new viruses and bacteria that are constantly mutating because of our excessively clean environments. And there's been a lot of studies done looking at the difference between immune systems and the development of allergies and eczema in cities versus the country. So if you grow up on a farm, and I'm not just saying this is actual research that's been done, the likelihood of developing allergies and asthma is tremendously diminished versus if you grow up in a city. If you grow up with several brothers and sisters and you're the youngest in your family, your likelihood of developing immune-related issues and becoming sick and all that stuff is a lot lower than your oldest sibling, because you have now been exposed to several kids worth of bacteria and viruses and all that stuff. So your immune system adapts that. If you grow up with pets, if you have 2 dogs, that's very, very protective for developing a strong immune system. Why is that? Because when your dogs go outside and they run around in the dirt and they roll around, they bring those microorganisms into the house. And as a young baby, you are interacting with that, and therefore your microbiome, the gut flora inside of you, adapts to that as well. So part of the problem in our more modern world is this excessive cleanliness. So the gut flora and our microbiome, these bacteria, the microorganisms that naturally live within and around us are so diminished, and they're very, very important for proper immunity. So we're seeing a lot more problems nowadays, I believe, because we are so impoverished from a very young age of these indigenous microorganisms. We don't play in the dirt as much anymore. Everyone's telling you to spray down your couch and your whole house with Febreze, use antibacterial soap, all these, gel antibacterial hand washes everywhere you go. It's excessive. And the problem with the antibacterial stuff is, first of all, we know that the overuse of antibiotics is a big problem. And the reason for that is because the more you prescribe antibiotics, the more the bacteria are able to adapt to that and then change their strain. So we get these superbugs, right? So it's a very, very big, it's a bit of a catch-22, because we want to do things that will obviously stop the communication of these diseases, but at the same time we have to understand that, sometimes antibiotics and vaccines are not necessarily the best way to do it all the time. So with that said, also antibiotics, if you have the flu, understand that the flu is a virus. It's not a bacteria, okay? So if you have the flu, you should not be taking antibiotics. If your doctor says, well, we should give you antibiotics because you have the norovirus or the flu or a parainfluenza virus, which mimics very similar kind of flu symptoms, you need to question your doctor's judgment there, because if they're not bacterial, I don't even know why they would suggest that. And we'll talk about flu shots and vaccines in a second, but just some really simple things to understand about how this all kind of comes into play. So coming back to hand washing for a second, the reason we don't want to go crazy with hand washing, because the other reason is that your skin is your body's first line of defense. Okay, so your skin is a semi-permeable membrane. It's your first line of defense against bacteria, against microorganisms. If you get a cut in your finger, there's a breach in that defense, and therefore things can get in. But here's the other thing: your skin produces oils, and these oils are they're important for lubrication, for the health of your skin, and that's a natural thing. Now, if you're continually washing yourself with soap all the time, you're going to dry your hands out. And just to give you a simple analogy of this, if you wash dishes over the sink and not just throw them in your dishwasher, you'll probably realize that your hands get pretty dry, right? And that's because if you're constantly using soap and dish detergent, that's removing the oil, the natural oil secretions from your skin. Okay, so we don't want to have that, because those natural oils are part of the protective mechanism your body uses against viruses, bacteria, and other things like that. Okay, so that's just some kind of basic 101 about viruses and kind of immunology. Again, we're not going to go too crazy into detail because I don't want to overwhelm you with this stuff, but I do feel that it's important for you to understand, at least at a fundamental level, the basics of how this works. Now, we're going to look at some stuff. So we talked about the norovirus, right? How I don't think it has, I mean, personally, I don't watch the news other than doing research for this podcast, because the news is very negative and it's very pessimistic. So, but I do find it actually pretty amusing when they cover some health related topics, because a lot of times, remember, they're just looking to fill content. They're looking to fill airtime. So they just kind of pile in the content and whatever's going to catch people. And remember, what bleeds leads. Okay, so if it bleeds, it leads. If it's compelling, if it's negative, it's someone got shot in the face, you're going to watch that versus something a little bit more positive. So they're always looking for ways to scare us. And one example of this is the coronavirus, which has received a huge amount of press in the last couple of weeks. So what is the coronavirus? Well, there are three main viruses that cause the common cold. One of them is the rhinovirus. You've probably heard of that. Another one is called the adenovirus, and then there's the coronavirus. These are three viruses that are happening, again, they're present all the time. And the thing is that during flu season, it's not just the influenza virus that is causing people to get sick or, to catch the flu. It's the norovirus, it's the influenza A, influenza B, the parainfluenza virus, it's the rhinovirus, coronavirus, adenovirus, respiratory syncytial virus, RSV. There's a lot of different things going on, okay? Some of them are a little more pronounced than others, but with the coronavirus, it's kind of laughable. Okay, because all these media outlets and all these different organizations are making this huge uproar saying that this is the next SARS. It's it's like, oh my God, people are just they're going crazy. We need to kind of keep this at bay. And maybe it's a good thing in a way to kind of be proactive about this. But at the same time, let's look at the facts. As I'm recording this, there have been 12 cases of coronavirus. Okay, 12 cases worldwide, five of them deaths. Okay, so again, it can be pretty serious, but again, 12 cases in compared to the norovirus, which in most cases does not lead to death unless it becomes extreme. I personally probably know 6 people in my immediate surroundings who contracted the norovirus or at the same time as I did, or did as a result of coming into contact with me. That's unfortunate. I had 2 friends that came down with similar symptoms as a result of just being in my presence. So I apologize to them. Sorry, guys. So right there, just one person, myself, 6 people within 1 or 2 degrees of separation contracted the norovirus. Meanwhile, the media has made this huge stink about the coronavirus, which 12 cases around the world. Okay, so we need a little bit of perspective here. And so it doesn't matter whether we're talking about the norovirus, which is the norovirus basically sets up base camp in your intestines and it populates over about 48 hours, and that's when it takes effect. It's obviously very, very contagious. But the thing here is that it's not about getting a vaccine. Like, it's not like you get sick because you have a deficiency in vaccines. That's not the problem. The problem is that, if 100 people, for instance, if 100 people are exposed to influenza A, do all 100 people get infected? Do they exhibit symptoms of the flu? Well, the answer is no. Okay. So we just know that intuitively, right? But let's say 20 people get it, 80 people don't. So what's the difference there? Why don't those 80 people get the flu while those 20 people do? Well, the big thing is that the common trait amongst these 100 people is that they're all exposed to the same virus. Okay, so that's the same. What's not the same? What's happening inside their body? Louis Pasteur, who is the father of pasteurization, he was also the father of the germ theory of disease, which says that we get sick because of germs. Now, this was early in his career. Later in his career, and actually before he passed away, he said that the germ is nothing, the environment is everything. And what he had later learned was pretty much refuted by the medical community, because by that time, the germ theory of disease had really taken up shop within the medical establishment as the cause, the framework of disease. And it's very convenient because humans, we like to see, there's got to be a bad guy. If something's wrong, we need to find an enemy. And it's very simple for health. If, it's not us, God forbid, we're not the problems here. It's something else. But I want to tell you that we are the problem. And I know that it's very easy to absolve the pain by saying that it's not your fault, it's not our fault, blah, blah, blah. The reality is that it is our fault. We have to take responsibility for our health. And the reason for that is because the environment inside of you is ultimately what will determine whether or not you get sick or not, in most cases, okay? So, again, personal anecdote from my life, I used to eat terribly for 20 some odd years of my life, 24 years of my life. Had terrible eczema, asthma when I was young, developed an autoimmune condition where I lost all my hair when I was 17 because my immune system just went crazy because I couldn't take it anymore. I was eating lots of processed foods, lots of grains, lots of dairy, very few fruits and vegetables, just a very, very poor North American diet. Very low energy and just not in good health. I would get sick probably 3 to 4 times a year with cold, flu, sore throats, you name it. So, thankfully, several years later, I was able to figure out what was going on. I went back to school and studied holistic nutrition and changed my life. I really did change my life in the course of a couple of weeks. I learned about, raw foods, plant-based foods, natural nutrition, and I was blown away. I mean, and this is after having graduated in kinesiology from one of the top 20 universities in the world and still being clueless about, more or less, about how to eat well. So I was just being exposed to stuff that people at the university level were never talking about. I mean, these are dietitians and doctors who are my professors, and nothing of this was being discussed. So I was able to, by implementing a lot of these natural nutrition strategies, really reverse my health. I was able to overcome my hair loss. I regrew my hair in a couple of weeks, although I still keep my head shaved, just because it's my claim to fame now for more than a decade, so it's a lot easier that way. But more importantly, I had more energy. And the cool thing from a sickness standpoint is that from 2005 to 2012, 7 years, I think I got sick once. 7 years, okay? That's how powerful your diet and lifestyle can be. And I'd always been very active. I played professional soccer up until I was 24. So it's not like I was unfit. But my diet was terrible. I always tell people you can be fit, but not necessarily healthy. And that was exactly where I was. So when I started to eat a lot more healthily, I changed my life. Literally, it was that powerful. So now, when we're talking about, it's not a matter of getting a vaccine. It's about taking care of yourself internally and doing things to support your immune system that will help you or minimize your risk of contracting one of these problems. Again, just here's another example. If you have kids, our son Oscar, he started half days in Montessori school when he was 18 months old. So that's pretty young. He had never been sick up until that point. As soon as he went to school, boom, he's sick within the first 1 or 2 weeks. And then, as with all kids, they spread the stuff around, they get sick. But why is it that little kids get sick and teenagers don't get as sick in those environments? It's because they haven't developed their immunity properly yet, okay? So if they have, if these young children have developed proper immunity, then their likelihood of getting, if their likelihood of developing these different viruses or colds or flus is much more diminished. So it takes a bit of time, obviously, for that immunity to kick in. And that's why things like breastfeeding are very important. A healthy diet from a young age are really important. And then there's some other strategies that we can put into place. So I want to talk about a couple of these strategies to really to fend off the likelihood of developing of whether it be the common cold or the flu. But before I do, I want to talk about one very common strategy that I'm sure you've been beaten over the head with from the medical community, from propaganda on the media, TV commercials, flyers, whatever else. And that has to do with flu vaccines. Now, I'm not going to talk about, I don't want to get into the debate here about whether they're good or bad. I mean, it's totally up to you. Personally, I don't vaccinate my kids. We decided to vaccinate Oscar for the first 6 months, then we decided against it. I just, having done all the research, and yeah, it's not good. I mean, I'm not going to go into the whole debate that it causes autism because there's, formaldehyde and mercury and all that kind of stuff in there. That's beside the point. What I want to share with you right now is that there's been some really startling research showing that flu shots are not even effective. Okay, they're we're seeing people that are getting vaccinated with flu vaccines and they're still contracting the flu. Okay, so why are we being told to get this stuff? I mean, it's one thing if every single person in the world gets the flu vaccine. I'm sure these pharmaceutical companies would be jumping up in joy. But the reality is that freedom of choice. I personally don't believe we need a flu shot, specifically vaccines for the flu. There's other obviously other conditions, other things that they're trying to prevent against, whether it be measles or mumps or whatever. Those vaccines are we're talking specifically about the flu here. Those other things are separate. But I think in most cases, we're pretty much okay with the vaccines. So I want to share some really enlightening stuff with you about this topic here, because I know that it's a very controversial topic. I want to approach it as diplomatically, but also as subjectively as possible, because I think there's some really interesting insights to gain from this. So first of all, I want to bring up some really interesting stuff that I don't know if you know about, but Sweden banned the vaccine for pertussis, which is like the whooping cough in kids, in 1979. And pertussis can be pretty dangerous because it can lead to death in kids. So it banned vaccines of pertussis because the government said, okay, well, this is too dangerous and it's ineffective. And surprisingly, or not surprisingly, infant mortality dropped afterwards. Okay, Sweden now maintains one of the lowest incidents of infant mortality in the world. And this is interesting considering that Sweden is a northern country, so they actually get less vitamin D than countries around the equator. And vitamin D is one of the nutrients you need to be getting more of if you want to prevent the flu and cold. Okay, so vitamin D is very, very important. Here's another one. In 1975, Japan raised the age of the pertussis vaccine to 2 years. To 2 years of age, because previously they had been administering it to kids under 2. And since that time, the incidence of sudden infant death syndrome has literally disappeared in Japan. Okay. Also, countries with voluntary vaccine programs, such as Canada, where I live, or the United Kingdom, have lower infant mortality rates than the U.S. And any country where we're kind of mandating the absolute need for these vaccines, we're seeing more and more problems. Every year in the U.S., the stats are showing about 12 to 14,000 reports of adverse reactions associated with vaccinations, including hospitalizations, permanent brain damage, and death in some cases. So there's a lot of different vaccines out there for measles, mumps, and rubella. So there's a lot of stuff out there, but essentially what I want to share with you specifically is something about the flu here. And I'm just trying to find I'm just kind of sifting through my notes here. So just give me a second. Okay. So one of the studies, where are we here? Okay. So one of the studies that was done looked at, where are we? Okay, there we go. Sorry. Sometimes my notes are all over the place, but that's what you get. Okay, so there was a recent study that was done at the University of Minnesota, and it was published in a very prestigious journal called Lancet, The Lancet. If you've ever seen it, you'll know what I'm talking about. And what they did was they looked at 5,000 studies. That's quite a few studies. So this was a meta-analysis, right? So they looked at 5,000 studies published over the last 45 years. And then they narrowed it down to the most accurate 31 studies that covered about 30,000 people within those studies. And what they basically concluded, looking at these 31 studies, was that flu shots are pretty much out of date. And in fact, they're using, in most cases, flu vaccines from the 1950s. Okay, so we're talking about how quickly viruses can evolve and change. Well, a lot of vaccines up until that point, again, over the last 45 years or so, not to say that every single vaccine today is using outdated vaccines, but over the course of their investigation, most of those vaccines were, again, half a century old. Okay, so the bugs back in 1960 are quite different than they are now. Pretty crazy. I'm just going to give you some more numbers here. Some sifting through here. Okay, so one of their they looked at just over 31,000 people, okay, and they compared the outbreak of flu in people getting flu shots against those who got a placebo. Out of the 13,000 people getting a placebo, 357 wound up with the flu. Okay, so that's about 2.75%. Out of the 19 or so thousand people getting a flu shot, 221 still got the flu. That's about a 1.18% of the group. So, maybe not statistically that different. I mean, it's kind of a doubling of people getting the flu in the first group who are getting a placebo, but it all comes back down to absolute versus relative risk. I'm not going to go into the difference between them, but the differences are very, very minimal with respect to are flu shots actually preventing the flu or not? Now, more recent research is saying that vaccines are 70% effective, yet we're seeing that there's a close to a 94% failure rate in a lot of recent trials. So again, there's a lot of debate around this. It's such a tricky subject. So, I just wanted to bring that up to kind of bring you up on some of the information that I've come across recently about this subject. And again, it's not about, we don't have a deficiency in vaccines. It's that we have this deficiency internally in terms of our internal environment, which is not strong enough to prevent these problems from happening in the first place. So I've spoken to many people about this. Actually, a good friend of mine who's a doctor, I was talking to him about this a little while ago, and he was saying that one of his previous clients was one of the leading people at the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, pretty much in the U.S. And he says, so this gentleman from the CDC said he doesn't even vaccinate his kids because he knows and has seen what goes into the vaccines. So I don't want to make this whole episode about vaccinations and flu shots, but I do want to bring this up to it needs to be discussed, right? It needs to be discussed within the household with your doctor and in an informed way. And at the end of the day, what I'm trying to get across is not so much about that vaccines lead to autism or whatever else. It's that we can't necessarily rely on something outside of us to protect us. Okay, I think that's the problem, is that we live in a society where there's this magic pill promise. And I think that if we look at, how can we as individuals fortify our own defenses so that we don't need these vaccines and we can stay healthy through ourselves, as opposed to this kind of acquired immunity by, taking in dead vaccines or 50-year-old vaccines, I think we're a lot better off. So I want to give you a couple strategies to help you do that. We'll finish off this episode by looking at a couple action steps that we can take, that you can take, that your kids can take starting today to stay healthy. So first of all, we talked about hand washing. Okay, so hand washing not in excess, but let's say you're at school and you come home, instead of digging your hand into a bowl of blueberries, then wash your hands first. Okay, but don't wash your hands every 5 seconds with soap or antibacterial stuff. Secondly is covering your mouth when you cough or sneeze. That's just a common courtesy to other people. You don't want to cough in people's face. You don't want to cough on their food. It just, it seems like common practice. But also using the sleeve sneeze. Don't cough in your hand because, again, hand-to-hand communication, if you're shaking somebody's hand, now your hand is just full of those particles. Okay, so, sneeze into your sleeve, get it into your arm, not into your hand. So that's what we can do from a kind of non-nutrition standpoint. Now, from a nutrition standpoint, we want to look at doing things that are going to support your immune system and not wear it down. So first of all, I talked about getting enough vitamin D. So vitamin D is really important because, as I just talked about, more and more people are now, more and more experts are saying that, flu is, I'm not going to say cause, but it's highly correlated to a lack of vitamin D more than anything else. And that's very interesting because when you look at the countries that have flu epidemics during the winter months, so for instance, November through February, we're looking at the northern hemisphere where we have the least amount of sunlight during that time. In the southern hemisphere, the peak of flu season is in August, which is their winter when they have the least amount of sun. So, it starts to make a lot of sense. And when you understand how vitamin D is so important for so many things inside the body, it's crazy. So we need to get more vitamin D in terms of natural sunlight, get full exposure if you can, a couple times a week without sunscreen, 10 to 15 minutes is fine. You also want to be looking at perhaps supplementing with a vitamin D3, not looking at fortified foods because they use artificial stuff, but looking at supplementing with a vitamin D3 as a very, very effective way of upping your vitamin D levels. So that's the first thing you want to look at. Second thing is we want to look at basic antioxidants, immune supportive nutrients. So looking at things like vitamin C, zinc, selenium, vitamin A, vitamin E. Okay. So you can basically sum those up as ACEs and zinc. Okay. So vitamin A, vitamin C, vitamin E, selenium, and zinc. Those are the big nutrients that are going to support your immune system and keep you healthy. So the good news is that you can get a lot of that stuff. You can get your vitamins A, your C, your E's through plant-based foods. Vitamin A is very, very abundant in sweet potatoes. It's actually the highest in sweet potatoes, more so than carrots. Carrots obviously a very good source as well. Vitamin C, you can pretty much get that in all fruits and vegetables. Vitamin E, very, very high in almonds. So if you enjoy almonds, raw almonds or almond milk, you're going to be getting a decent source of vitamin E. Zinc, a little bit tougher to come by. You want to look at things like pumpkin seeds, oysters. Obviously, it's not as common practice or in most people's diets, but pumpkin seeds are a very, very high source of zinc. You can also look at supplementing with zinc if you want to. Then obviously, if you're eating red meat, you'll get a bit of zinc there as well. And then selenium. Selenium is a very, very powerful antioxidant. And it's most prominently found in Brazil nuts. So Brazil nuts contain the highest amount of selenium, and the good news is that you only need one Brazil nut per day to meet your requirements for selenium. That's pretty amazing, okay? One Brazil nut per day. Talk about popping a pill, right? So selenium is very, very important, and one Brazil nut a day will give you the selenium you need. So those are some very, very simple things. You can also look at using a good quality probiotic to replenish your gut flora, get those good bacteria back in, and obviously getting good quality sleep, reducing sugar intake because sugar is obviously going to depress your immune system. Those are some very simple strategies that you can put into place. Again, this is not rocket science. When you start to understand how your body works and how your immune system works, and you look at the nutrients that will support you, and there's obviously a couple others, and a bunch of other kind of plant-based herbs and stuff that'll be more kind of a more boosting and more supportive. But for now, just start with those. It's a great place to start, and just essentially just avoid the crap, right? That's what I did. I just moved I moved away from a typical North American diet to incorporating more natural foods that were just supporting my immune system, because I often say how you heal anything is how you heal everything. So if you want to prevent the flu, how you eat for that is also very similar to how you would eat to have more energy. It's also very similar to how you would eat to lose weight. So whatever it is, okay? The body responds very similarly to this kind of general framework of eating closer to nature. So with that said, let's just quickly recap on some of the stuff we talked about. The norovirus is this intestinal virus that's causing all sorts of vomit and diarrhea all around the world. Very, very contagious. So just be careful not to come into contact with people who have it, or stay away from them if best you can. Don't rely on flu shots and vaccines. Take care of yourself by boosting your own health with good quality nutrition, adequate sleep, good amounts of natural sunlight, reduce your sugar intake, avoid the crap. You'll be a lot better off with that. So I hope you found this episode has been helpful to you. Again, if you want to go deeper into this material, we have an entire module within Super Nutrition Academy that talks about immunity, vaccinations. Well, not too much about the vaccinations, but understanding how viruses work, bacteria, how we can prevent them, eating to be as healthy as possible. If you want to learn more about that stuff and how you can really become like a superhuman, if you will, then be sure to join me at supernutritionacademy.com. And that's really, it's kind of like the nutrition school for everyday people. It's, if you don't really care about becoming a nutritionist or a doctor, you can acquire the level of nutrition savvy that most nutritionists would have without spending thousands of dollars in tuition or hundreds of hours over a month in class time. So check it out, supernutritionacademy.com. It's an amazing, amazing academy. There's really nothing like it on the web as far as I know. And I look forward to seeing you there. So until next time, have a great day. Take action on some of the stuff we've talked about in this episode, and we'll talk to you next time.